It's time to admit dumpster diving isn't working. The Pistons have accumulated a lot of former top draft picks like James Wiseman and Bagley in recent years. While this was a clever gimmick to try to rekindle and reap their value in Detroit after all the hype that made them into top draft picks, but it's time to admit they are who they are, and no matter how big of an opportunity they give or a new bigger role on their team, it's not changing. I'm not saying the Pistons need to find and hire Sam Hinkie, but the blueprint and strategy to get out of the situation has happened once before. After continuing to tank, they finally hit after multiple failed draft picks, like the Pistons now, to finally end up with Embiid and then Ben Simmons, who changed their franchise into playoff contention at the time. The Pistons need to start off fresh like how Sam Hinkie did with the trusted process 76ers. There's no way around mediocrity, especially not in their current state. No star will join them. They even traded someone with potential like Jeremy Grant. No trade or signing at this point can save their historic losing season. They will continue to lose and might as well embrace it. After snapping their historic 28-game losing streak, they're already back to losing 3 in a row. The new draft lottery rules made it so the top 3 worst teams during the season will all equally have the same odds at the top 3 picks in the next NBA draft, and so even if the Pistons are historically bad and continue like this, they will still not be rewarded with the number 1 pick, just like in the past few years where their luck has failed them. They may even end up failing in the draft again this year despite being this bad during the season. The only way to strategically and mathematically increase their odds is to accumulate more draft picks. They can't do much to guarantee their chance at the number 1 pick unless they wait for the draft lottery much later into the season and then beg to move up the draft. They don't even have the assets that any team that has the number 1 pick would want anyways, but they could trade all the somewhat valuable rotational pieces the Pistons have around, like Wiseman, who could be a good backup big, Killian Hayes, Ivy, Alec Burks, etc. One player many teams were interested in even last year was Bojan Bogdanovic, and he's still someone a lot of playoff teams will be interested in as he's almost averaging 20 points per game, but he's 34 years old, so really doesn't fit the Pistons' rebuild timeline. The Pistons did swallow their pride and traded Bogdanovic and even Alec Burks to the Knicks, but only for 2 second-round picks and pretty much Quentin Grimes, who the Pistons most highly value, to have pulled the trigger on this trade. One issue is the Pistons roster is realistically backup talent on most NBA teams, and many teams could use an upgrade to bolster their benches. The Pistons can feed their need and get some draft capital around the league in return. With more draft picks, they can liken their odds that a few may hit and end up with the star, even if they are later picks. Remember, Jimmy Butler, Maxey, Siakam, Gobert, Jokic were all late picks that turned into all-stars. The Pistons have picked consistently and safely based on who was left available and who the media's draft board prospected to be the best available player, like ending up with Killian Hayes over Halliburton. With more draft picks late first round and second round they could get in return from a fire sale of their current players, they could take more swings and risky picks that could pan out into the future superstar they really need. So why should other teams help out the Pistons by giving their draft picks? Well, because their own draft picks, especially later picks, don't pan out well even for themselves. This is especially the case for contending teams. In most cases, you end up with a player that isn't ready to help them now or realize they're leading to losses during the season, which is bad given how close and competitive playoff seeding is now. So they'll get sent down to the G League. Then they'll either prove their talent and can find a role back on the team, or the team will recognize they're not NBA ready and then will eventually ride out the bench until their rookie contracts are up and end up out of the league. This just becomes a waste of time for those contending teams. And so instead, the Pistons can provide players that have already made these rounds and have experience, and most already found some resourcefulness and role capabilities a lot of teams can use now, such as Wiseman's size and rebounding, Hayes' defense as a guard, Ivy's cutting and speed. The Pistons can choose who they want to give up on and then pass them to teams that can use them better in exchange for draft picks, where their odds of finding a future star increase. And they can make those big swings while drafting instead of picking safely, ending up with their current roster construction. The other teams can find immediate role players and help for their teams, while the Pistons can collect draft picks to find some diamonds in the rough. Remember, the OKC Thunder also operated similarly and now find themselves with one of the best Western Conference records currently in the NBA, while being a very young team with Shea, Chet, and Jalen Williams. For every big swing like the Butlers and Siakams, they'll end up with a lot of misses too, like Don Maker, Taco Fall, or Bol Bol, but eventually one of those risky picks will pan out to superstardom, like Giannis, Markkanen, etc. Recent reports indicate the Pistons are interested in upgrading their power forward spot with the star-level player like Tobias Harris or Siakam. In the short term, they may win a few more games, but this doesn't lead them any closer to playoff contention or a bright future. Why should the Pistons sacrifice on their own draft picks, which by the way would be the most valuable in the whole league given how bad their season record is? The Pistons may very well end up with the first pick only to trade it for an aging former all-star that doesn't line up with the Pistons Pistons rebuild. Their draft picks are the way to get out of this mess, not dig themselves deeper in this hole. Also, keep in mind every star player wants to compete for titles nowadays, nor would they want to be associated or linked to the worst team in NBA history, as a star playing on this team will certainly be held against them during All-Star voting and All-NBA if the Pistons don't suddenly start winning, which none of the players they're interested in is even capable of doing themselves. Even Cade has some All-Star consideration, worthy numbers, but won't ever make it until the Pistons start winning. People are already saying to free Cade. Imagine how it would be for a star entering this team with experience and leverage. They'll simply demand a trade out to join a contender, or at least a playoff team. For stars, winning matters and is considered when voting for NBA awards and even future contract negotiations. So losing with the Pistons will be a career-burying move they'll immediately want out of. There's likely not one star in the league that would volunteer to take on the risk of turning around this team and trying to lead this team to wins. The likelihood is the Pistons trade for a star they're desperate for. The star never wanted to go there and then demands out to protect his career, and then the Pistons now have a disgruntled star that refuses to play, whose worth will take a massive hit and have to sell the player back on the trade market for less than what they got him for. There are no shortcuts for this rebuild, especially given the current NBA climate with star leverage. The Pistons are really trying to be like the Utah Jazz, thinking a single all-star like Lauri Markkanen would save them, but in reality the Jazz built Lauri to develop to this themselves. They never acquired an all-star, they let him become one. There are no shortcuts for rebuilding teams now. Also, the Jazz win more games simply because they have a better team, like getting players who some saw as stars and let go of early, similar to what the Pistons tried with Bagley and Wiseman, but their choices panned out well, like with Lowry, Colin Sexton, and even Taylor Horton-Tucker. The Jazz are simply a better team with great role players like Olynyk and Sixth Man of the Year winner Jordan Clarkson. The Jazz even managed to trade expiring contract Kelly Olynyk to the Raptors for a first-round pick in the upcoming draft. They also have bright young talent like Walker Kessler. Simply acquiring an all-star isn't going to turn this Pistons team to be better, like the Jazz, or even make them that much more competent and competitive than they already are. The Pistons may be able to swing more close games in their favor to wins by adding a star, but this also just means teams won't press their stars and starters as much against them like most teams currently do, so they still will lose just as much games from the illusion of currently appearing more competitive than they really are. Also remember, last summer the Pistons already had cap space and used it to sign players that were supposed to help them immediately with Joe Harris and Monte Morris. Monte Morris is injured and Joe Harris was injured and then now deep in their bench. Monte Morris makes $9.8 million while Joe Harris makes $19.9 million this season, so clearly this failed terribly for them already. Why continue to make the same mistake on a larger scale this time? The Pistons actually finally just traded one of their veterans, Monte Morris, and got back a second-round pick, signaling they may now be on the right track for a full-on rebuild. It's the sacrifice that's needed to really dig themselves out of this hole. At the trade deadline, the Pistons additionally traded Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks after as well to the Knicks. The reality is the Pistons haven't gotten worse, but the rest of the league got much better, and that's not suddenly going to change no matter what moves they try to do at this point. Their best option is to do what the trust of Pasta 76ers that faced this situation did years ago. They swallowed their pride and blew it all up and embraced losing. Even the NBA can't deny what better choice does the Pistons have now. Remember to like and subscribe. Also check out one of my other videos on the screen.